Hello everyone and welcome to our weekly live discussion once again. I'm so excited to welcome you. My name is Naveen Agarwal and today we're going to be talking about data sources that you should be using or you are probably using in your post-market safety surveillance process. But this is not a webinar or a lecture. This is a discussion where we talk about daily life problems that we encounter in our work, day-to-day questions, challenges, points of confusion, sources of frustration. So please mention in the chat as we continue talking about our topic of the day today, what are some of the questions you are dealing with? And what causes you most frustration when it comes to data sources related to your post-market safety surveillance process? That is the whole purpose, is to have a conversation and a dialogue with you. But first, make an introduction. Tell us where you are joining from and what is your role in the quality management system or the risk management process for your medical device. Just let us learn a little bit about you and share that information with everybody. Now, the purpose of these conversations, as I mentioned before, is to engage in a dialogue and really talk about day-to-day questions and problems. So at any time, feel free to share any information that you think is relevant and pertinent to the discussion. But be aware that this is a public forum. So do not share any business proprietary information or business sensitive information. Please stay professional at all times, especially if you disagree with any of the comments or discussions going on. And finally, know that this is not meant to be regulatory advice, either for the purpose of submission or for regulatory compliance. This is purely information and discussion. And the intent here is to collaborate, learn from each other, share common challenges and best practices. So that is the purpose. And really our focus will be on the data sources today. But as part of the post-market safety surveillance process, any other topic or question of interest that is relevant to you, please mention that in the chat below. So the way it's going to happen for those of you who are joining for the first time is that we will spend about 30 minutes or so today. And in the beginning, I'll set the stage with only a few slides. And again, as I mentioned before, this is not a webinar or a lecture. So this is just to set the conversation, set the topic of discussion and focus today, and then go into then really talking about some key points and your questions and comments. So the more you share, the better our conversation would be. And you don't have to wait for the slides for me to go through the slides. You can enter your comment or question at any time in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on it to see what is on your mind. So let's do this. First, I want to start with a question of the day. Which data source you wish you could be using in your post-market review but not currently using? And let me clarify that. This is not intended as a topic of discussion for compliance or non-compliance. This is not what is required, what is not required, but more as a curiosity on my part to learn from you what it is that you wish you could be using. And the goal is to achieve effectiveness. We talked about effectiveness in our last live discussion. I had a great discussion at that time, and if you missed it, you can watch the recording of that session. And the whole idea is, are we being effective? Are the data sources that we are utilizing helping us to be effective in our post-market safety surveillance process? And for us to be able to answer that question, we need to know what the purpose of that process is. So please share when you can, and if you are willing to, which data source you wish you could be using in your post-market review but not currently using. And I actually will be sharing with you some of the very common data sources that are used in the industry and are offered in some guidance documents. I'll share that with you in my slides today. So let's first look at the requirement. I always start with what is the requirement of clause 10.2 in ISO 14971. Now, feedback or post-market review information is included as part of ISO 13485 too. So there's a lot of commonality. But if we focus on clause 10.2 of 14971, it requires that the manufacturer shall collect, shall means it's not optional, manufacturer shall collect, where applicable, information generated during production and monitoring of the production process, information generated by the user, information generated by those accountable for installation, use, and maintenance of the medical device, information generated by the supply chain, publicly available information, and information related to the generally acknowledged state of the art. Now, notice they don't use the word data, they use the word information. And I pay a lot of attention to terminology. So we'll discuss what is the difference between data and information in just a little bit. They are not telling you which data sources you must look at, but they're telling you which information or what kind of information you should collect and have and be ready and use that as part of your review process. So there's a difference between data and information. So let's go to the dictionary. Merriam-Webster dictionary defines data as factual information. Now they give examples such as measurements or statistics used as basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. But data could be anything. It could be any piece of data, either factual, statistical, measurable, formal, structured, or unstructured. Any piece of data that you can use to then gather the information. And what is information? Information is knowledge obtained from investigation, study, or instruction. So there's a step between data and information. That step is analysis. We have to do some analysis to understand what kind of information the data is providing us. ISO 14971 requires us to collect information. How we achieve that is up to us. It is up to us to define what kind of data sources we will look at, how we will look at them, what analytical methods we will use, what kind of information that it will provide us. And hopefully it is providing us the information or the types of information that are listed in clause 10.2. So that is a big difference. Having said that, it's kind of very open to us. And that is exactly why I posed the question of the day to you today. Hopefully you will share that with me. Which type of data source you wish you could be using in your process, but you are not currently using that for one reason or another? And if you share that with me, I would love to hear what is on your wish list and what it is that you're not able to do because of certain limitations or certain reasons. So please share that in the comments below. Okay, so here is the last slide for today. This is a long list of data sources provided in ISO TR 20416 guidance. It's a guidance document on post-market safety surveillance or post-market surveillance process, where in this Annex A, they give a long list of data sources and describe each data source, what it could be used for, what kind of information can be collected from that data source. They describe that. It's a very, very powerful document, and I strongly encourage you to take a look at that. But here's a list for your reference. I'll go through it very quickly, but it'll be interesting for me to learn from you which data sources out of this list you wish you could be using. For example, complaints, we know all about complaints, adverse events, maintenance information, installation information, return medical device, X-plans, medical device registries, PMCF, which is post-market clinical follow-up studies, advisory notices, scientific literature, market surveillance activities by regulatory authorities, public databases from regulatory authorities, conferences, trade shows. We can gather a lot of information from there. Regulatory requirements, standards, guidance documents, social media, medical device distribution and tracking, finished product QC data that you can generate internally, internal audits, external audits or inspections, market research, customer surveys. So this is a long list, right? There are many sources of data available. In fact, I believe there is no shortage of data today. What we have to figure out is which data sources are appropriate for us. What kind of data sources give us the kind of information we are required to collect and we should be collecting so that our process is effective. That should be the topic of discussion for today. And the more you share in your chat and comments, the better our conversation would be, because I want to spend most of my time addressing those points. So here we have a comment from Vignesh. Thank you for sharing this. With recent advances in AI and ML, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning, qualitative data has a lot of potential to become as objective as quantitative data. For instance, natural language processing for complaint description on large volumes of complaints helps quantify the verbal comments given a large enough volume and ripe for objective analysis. Perfect. We now have tools available to us. And in fact, Vignesh, you are bringing up a very, very good point, because it is also my experience that we have a rich source of information in our complaints database. Not only do we have information about the types of events that are happening in the marketplace, which typically we use in a chart or a graph or maybe a Pareto chart to see what are the top issues. We do some statistical analysis. But we have this description from the person who is providing the complaint to us. They tell us. They tell us what the issue is and how they felt about it. What was their experience? And it is that experience, inherent that experience, I believe, is a potential signal. So here's the difference between vigilance and surveillance. These are the terms we will talk about in other discussions too. But vigilance is simply keeping track of what is going on and reporting adverse events to health authorities and regulatory authorities. Surveillance is where the true analysis in terms of signal detection, confirmation, and action happens. So Vignesh, you are bringing up an excellent point. Natural language processing tools are very powerful tools, and you don't have to go with a lot of expensive software solutions out there. There are many good quality, even cloud-based solutions that you can use. But you can feed that tool with all the data you have. Say you collect 100 complaints a month. Each of these 100 complaints potentially has a lot of text. That text is the person telling you about the complaint, your staff talking to them about the investigation they did, or a request for additional information. It keeps coming in. A complaint remains open for a long time, correct? So that is kind of unstructured data, not a structured data, but unstructured data that can be used to generate information. You can also look at it as potentially an insight about what is happening in the field with your product or medical device, which exactly is the point of this post-market review. So let's take a step back and ask the questions, why? Why should we do this? Why should we do the post-market review? What is the purpose? Certainly it's a regulatory requirement. That's straightforward. We have to comply with a regulatory requirement. But what is the intent? What is the purpose? A simple purpose definitely is vigilance. We are required to report adverse events in a suitable time frame with the right sense of urgency, right amount of information. But we are also, particularly in EU MDR and 14971, we are required to do surveillance. And 13485, we are supposed to review it and take action. For what purposes? Number one, safety and performance. Continued safety and performance. We have to make sure our device continues to stay safe and effective. So that's number one. And what about the life cycle aspects? What if our medical device is no longer conforming to the state of art? What should we do then? If that is the case, we have to review and ensure that we still meet the regulatory bar of safety and effectiveness and satisfy all the requirements. So this is the purpose of our post-market safety review. Now, the level of analysis and the kind of analysis, the kind of decisions, actions you will take will depend upon the type of the product. So here is the next question for you. Do you look at different types of sources of data for, let's say, a new innovative product which is just going into the market versus a stable, mature product which has already been in the field for several years? Do you treat them differently? And what kind of data sources you find useful in either case, in both of those cases? Please share that in your comments below. I'll be very happy to hear from you how you make those decisions. And again, let me emphasize, this is not a compliance versus non-compliance discussion. This is more about learning from each other, sharing common challenges and best practices. So hopefully you will share that with me in the comments below. Okay, so one important point I want to talk to you about is the type of data. We briefly touched on that, structured versus non-structured. Another way of looking at it is formal versus informal. Do we have a structured process to gather certain types of information? That means maybe we have a form, maybe we have a template, maybe we have certain fields that we collect information on, and maybe we have an informal way. Maybe our sales staff is going out in the field and talking to customers and gathering experience. That's all informal. So what is the type of data we are collecting? And the amount of data, how much? How much of each we have? Do we have about the same of each, or one overwhelmingly more than the other? The quantity. Third point is quality of that data. Now there are three points to consider, three stages to consider when it comes to quality. The first one is at the point of collection. What are we collecting? How it is being collected? So I'll give you an example of where we should be careful about quality and reliability. Who is providing the information or data to us? Is it the patient? Is it the doctor? Or is it the staff? And after how long the event happened that they gave us this data, they gave us a call? Is it very recent, or has it been a couple of days? Because they may be acting on just their memory, and that may not be completely accurate. You may have to follow up on that a few times. That's stage number one. Stage number two is at the point of documentation. When our staff or our team members are documenting that piece of data or information in our system, whether it's a manual system or an automated system, whether it's like a paper copy or Excel worksheet or maybe a database, at the point of documentation, we need to ensure accuracy. And here's an example. A lot of times issues happen, and I would love to hear from you what your experience is, in coding a certain type of an event. Maybe somebody is looking at a table of codes and they're trying to match the best code with what the person is describing to them. It may not be accurate. Or in many cases, they might pick something called other. And what is that other? We don't know what that other is. And you might find, if you go dig through your complaints, a significant proportion of your complaints are coded under other. I've seen that happen. So how do you handle that? What insight you gain out of that type of data analysis? It can become challenging. And the third stage where accuracy becomes important is at the point of data retrieval. When you are retrieving data for analysis, are you getting exactly what is in the system, or something is being lost, or there are some translational errors, right? Those are the things that we have to think about. So just to summarize, 3 stages or 3 points at which you have to think about accuracy: at the point of collection, at the point of documentation, at the point of retrieval. So we have to think about accuracy. That is an important point. So I hope this this resonates with you. What is your experience? Please again share that in the chat and comments below. So again, let me repeat the question of the day, because I have not seen any responses from anybody right now. I've not seen that. So the question of the day was, which data source you wish you could be using in your post-market review process, but you are not using currently? Again, this is not a compliance, non-compliance discussion. It's just your wish. What could you be using to become more effective in your post-market surveillance process? What kind of, where is the data source, maybe a magical data source that you are thinking about or you have heard about, but you're not currently using? Please share that in the comment below. Okay, so another point I wanted to talk about is understanding limitations of the data. Okay, so here's a comment before I go to that point. Let me see. Thank you, Taylor, for sharing this. Coding of a complaint has been a significant issue in my experience. Not only to develop a process to maintain consistency across complaints, but also to be able to properly translate this information into data that can be used as an input into risk management. So that's a great point, because sometimes we may use terms which are not standardized terms as codes, and then people may wonder how to match a certain code with what we are hearing from our patient or doctors or users when they call us with an issue. There might be a lot of problems with that. I have talked about standardization of codes in other forums, and that could be a topic of discussion for our live sessions here. But very briefly, I will tell you that there are standardized codes available. FDA uses them, IMDRF has standardized codes, and also MEDRA, Medical Dictionary for Regulatory Affairs, is a standardized database, and all these standardized sources are getting harmonized. So it is important for you to be aware of that, take a look at it. and use those standardized codes to describe the harm that is being experienced or reported by your patients and doctors and users. It'll help you a lot in trying to match what is being reported to you with what it should stand for. And that'll probably help you develop a more accurate analytical method, give you better understanding of the signal, and more importantly, it'll help you to analyze the publicly available data, because guess what? Most of the publicly available data I know from FDA, for example, does include those FDA codes, which are mapped to the MEDRA codes. So you can have a mapping. This standardization of codes is very, very important. So Taylor, thank you for bringing that up. Significant challenge. And you have to keep up with it. As you are learning more from the marketplace and actual use conditions, maybe the codes you are using are no longer sufficient. Maybe you have to look up, and by the way, these standard dictionaries are very big, very large database. Maybe you have to find another code that more accurately represents what is being reported to you. So you may have to constantly update this standardized code list. Some people call it a master harms list, and I have helped people set that up. A master harms list where you describe each potential harm in terms of a standard code, and you define what it means in medical terms. So that is where you have to work very collaboratively with your clinical specialists, medical doctors, people who have actual experience in the field and who can accurately describe what the medical condition is. So this is very, very important. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I was going to talk about really the limitations, understanding the limitations of your current data. This is the belief I have. Before you can tell what the data is telling you, you should understand what it is not telling you. Many times we imagine because we have some notion about what we should learn about this, and we see more in the data than what it is presenting to us. So we have to be very, very careful about not to let that influence our analysis and the information we're going to get out of it. So limitations, simple examples. Now, having said that, first of all, limitations doesn't mean that you should reject a data source. No data source is perfect, but you need to understand what the limitations are before you can use it effectively. As an example, FDA's MOD data source is a very rich source of data, but it cannot allow you to estimate rates of adverse events. Many times it has incorrect codes associated with the device problem or the patient problem. Many times the codes are missing. Many times the narratives, the description of the event is not clear or sufficient. If you understand the limitations, you can still use it, but in a more appropriate way with proper guidance about the level of uncertainty that you have in the information that you have obtained from that type of data source. So no data source is perfect. Try to understand what the limitations are. So that's a very key point for you to really pay attention to. Now, finally, we have very few minutes left here in our conversation. I want to touch upon the third topic today, which is making a decision about a new product versus a mature product. I asked this question before in our conversation today. So if you have a brand new product, think about it this way. Even if it might be 80 or 90% similar from a technological point of view to an existing product, but the intended use may be different. The practice, the medical practice in the market you are trying to launch may be different. And as a result, there might be a whole set of new, potentially foreseeable misuses, use errors or misuses. You have to be aware of that. You may have done an analysis, which you are supposed to do in your development, and you have put risk controls in place, but your level of certainty in the risk benefit or benefit risk balance is still not very high because it's a brand new product. It has not gained significant market experience. So the decision you have to make about selecting the data sources and how frequently you look at those data sources is going to be different than a mature product which has been in the marketplace for a long time and is pretty stable. Benefit risk is pretty stable, not much is changing. That decision is different because the level of certainty you have in the benefit risk is high. So you have to think about your level of certainty in the benefit risk of a certain product, or let's say a stable mature product going from one market to another market. That could be a significant change. So we have to think of change in different ways. Typically we think of change purely from a technological point of view. Not necessary. Change can be in many different ways. So I hope that makes sense. We are coming to the end of our conversation today, so I will briefly summarize again what we talked about. But again, if you have another question or comment, please mention that in the chat below. So we talked about different data sources, and we went through a long list of different types of data sources that can be used. It is coming from ISO TR 20416, a very, very useful piece of document, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But more importantly, we talked about what the requirement is. Requirement is not about specific data sources. Requirement is about types of information you must collect. And there's a difference between data and information. We need to understand that. Data sources are what will allow us to get to the information piece which is required. And in the middle, we have to do the analysis. We talked a lot about the types of data, structured data, unstructured data, formal versus informal. You can also talk about quantitative versus qualitative. We talked a lot about quality of the data and focused on 3 points, 3 places where you have to worry about the accuracy and quality at the point of collection, point of documentation, and the point of retrieval. We talked about limitations of data sources that you should be aware of. No data source is perfect, but if you are aware of the limitations, you can use the data in an appropriate way to gather the information and assess your level of confidence and level of certainty in that information which you are deriving from that data source. And finally, we talked about the decisions you have to make related to a new product, innovative new product, or a very stable mature product. Thinking about the change that you are introducing. And the change is limited not only to the technological characteristics of the product, but the intended use and the geographical location, the market that it is being positioned. So you have to think about change a little bit broadly. Again, I hope this is useful. I look forward to hearing from you, staying connected, continue to engage on LinkedIn. And finally, I leave you with some free resources. And here they are. You can go to my website, www.achieveexcel.com, and go to free stuff. And I'm offering 2 free gifts to you. One is a hazard analysis template. And in my experience, that is a challenging area. You can download this free template and it'll follow up with video instruction on how to use it, best practices, and some mistakes to avoid. And the second is a free membership to my knowledge sharing forum. It's a closed group, completely moderated by me, and there are already 160 members. And we are having an ongoing conversation about different topics. So you can be connected to colleagues almost all the time and share your issues, your challenges, and also best practices. The whole intent is to bring the community together and have a conversation about different things. So I leave you again today, and thank you for your time and engagement. And I look forward to connecting with you again next week, and also maybe on the knowledge sharing forum. Have a good day, everyone.